The psychology of people who don't post their photos on social media. A deep psychological journey into the silent ones. Imagine scrolling through your Instagram feed. Hundreds of smiling faces stare back at you. Vacations, parties, selfies, sunsets, people living their lives in full color, for the world to see. And then you think of someone, maybe a friend, a coworker, maybe even yourself, who simply doesn't do that. No profile picture, no check-ins, no birthday photos, nothing. Who are these people? What are they hiding? Are they lonely? Are they arrogant? Are they simply too busy? Or is something far more profound happening beneath the surface? This is not just a social media question. This is a question about human psychology. About identity, fear, privacy, confidence, trauma, and the deepest needs of the human soul. Because when you understand why someone refuses to share their face with the world, you understand something essential about what it means to be human in the digital age. Let's go on a journey together. A journey into the minds of the quiet ones. The invisible ones. The ones who watch, but are never watched. Chapter 1. The world we live in, where visibility has become currency. We live in a world that has confused visibility with value. Social media platforms were born with the promise of connection, and in many ways, they delivered. But somewhere along the way, an invisible marketplace emerged. A marketplace where your worth is measured not in character or wisdom, but in followers, likes, and impressions. Think about what happens when someone posts a photo. Within seconds, the brain begins its anxious calculation. How many likes? Who viewed it? Did the right people see it? Did they react? This is not vanity, or at least, not always. This is the human brain desperately seeking what it has always sought: belonging, validation, and love. Social media exploited one of our deepest psychological needs, the need to be seen. And for most people, the response was to lean in. To post more. To share more. To perform more. But a small, fascinating group of people looked at this world and said, quietly, without drama, no, thank you. These are the people we're here to understand today. Before we go further, let me be clear, there is no single explanation. The psychology of non-posters is as diverse as humanity itself. Some of them are the most confident people you will ever meet. Others are the most wounded. Some are protecting themselves. Others are simply indifferent. And some, this may surprise you, are the most psychologically healthy people in the room. But what they all share is this: a relationship with their own identity that does not require external validation through digital images. And that alone is extraordinary in today's world. Chapter 2. The confident ones, they don't need your approval. Let's start with the group that most people don't expect, the deeply confident. There is a psychological concept called internal locus of control, the belief that your life, your worth, and your happiness come from within rather than from external sources. People with a strong internal locus of control tend to evaluate themselves based on their own standards, not the opinions of others. For these people, social media simply doesn't make sense. Not because they hate connection. Not because they're antisocial, but because they have already answered the question that most people use social media to ask: am I enough? They answered it years ago. The answer was yes, and they moved on. I once knew a man like this. A surgeon, brilliant, warm, deeply loved by everyone around him. He had no Instagram, no Facebook, no Twitter. His colleagues couldn't understand it. Don't you want people to know what you're doing? They'd ask. He would smile and say, the people who matter already know. This is the key phrase. The people who matter already know. For the deeply confident non-poster, their social circle is real, physical, and present. They have coffee with their friends. They call their family. They celebrate birthdays in person. They don't need to broadcast their joy. They experience it fully, in private, with the people they love. In fact, research in positive psychology has shown something counterintuitive. The act of sharing positive experiences on social media can sometimes reduce the actual enjoyment of those experiences. When you're focused on capturing the moment, you're no longer living in it. The confident non-poster has often discovered this truth instinctively. They protect their joy by keeping it private. Chapter 3. The wounded ones, when privacy means protection. Now let's turn to a more delicate story. Not everyone who avoids posting photos is doing so from a place of strength. Some are doing it from a place of deep pain. Consider the woman who was in a controlling relationship for 5 years. Her ex-partner monitored her social media constantly. He would comment on photos of her with male friends. He would demand explanations for every check-in. He would analyze her expressions in photos, looking for signs of happiness that didn't include him. When she finally left, when she found the courage to walk out of that dark chapter of her life, one of the first things she did was go private. Then she went silent, not because she was ashamed, not because she was hiding, but because silence had become her armor. She had learned, at a cellular level, that visibility was dangerous. That being seen could lead to being controlled, being monitored, being hurt. This is a pattern that trauma therapists see frequently. People who have experienced stalking, domestic abuse, public humiliation, or even cyberbullying often develop what we might call digital invisibility as a coping mechanism. It is not pathological, it is survival. The brain is magnificently adaptive. When it learns that a certain behavior, in this case, public visibility, leads to pain, it begins to avoid that behavior. This is basic conditioning, the same mechanism that makes a burned child fear fire. But here is where it gets complex. Some of these individuals, with time and healing, begin to reclaim their presence. They post a photo, they share a moment, tentatively, carefully, like a person learning to walk again after an injury. Others never return, and that is also okay. Because for some people, invisibility is not just protection, it becomes a profound redefinition of self. They no longer need the world to see them to feel real. Chapter 4. The Thinkers, Philosophy in the Age of the Selfie. There is a third category of non-posters that I find the most intellectually fascinating, the philosophical objectors. These are people who have thought deeply, perhaps too deeply, about what social media is actually doing to human beings. They've read the research. They understand the dopamine loops. They know about the surveillance capitalism model, where their attention and data are the product being sold. They've watched documentaries, read books, had long conversations at dinner tables about the erosion of privacy, the commodification of identity, and the slow death of genuine human connection. And they made a choice. A conscious, deliberate, philosophical choice. No, this group includes artists who believe that the constant performance of self on social media is artistically corrupting. Who believe that mystery is essential to creativity, that once you have explained yourself to the world, once you have packaged and presented your identity as a consumable product, something essential is lost. It includes writers who fear that their interior life, the rich, messy, private world that feeds their work, will be hollowed out by the constant pressure to translate experience into content. It includes philosophers, scientists, and educators who have become increasingly alarmed by what they see as the social media platform's fundamental design, to maximize engagement by exploiting our most primitive psychological triggers. Outrage, envy, lust, fear. These non-posters are not afraid of technology. They're not technophobes or Luddites. Many of them use the internet extensively for research, communication, and creation. But they have drawn a line. And that line runs around their image, their face, their personal life. For them, not posting photos is an act of resistance. A quiet, powerful refusal to participate in a system they believe is designed to diminish us. Chapter 5. The Introverts, When Energy is Precious. Then there are the introverts. And I want to be careful here, because introversion is one of the most misunderstood personality traits in modern culture. Introversion does not mean shyness. It does not mean social anxiety. It does not mean you dislike people. It means, at its core, that social interaction is energetically costly for you. That you recharge in solitude rather than in company. That after a party, you need a long, quiet evening alone to recover. For introverts, social media can feel like being at a party that never ends. A constant stream of social demands, expectations, and interactions. Someone likes your photo, now you feel obligated to respond. Someone comments, now you're in a conversation you didn't initiate. Someone tags you, now you're visible in a context you didn't control. For an extrovert, this is thrilling. For an introvert, it can be genuinely exhausting. Many introverts who don't post photos describe it not as a philosophical stance or a fear response, but simply as self-preservation. They prefer to manage their social energy carefully, to choose their interactions deliberately, to engage deeply with a few, rather than superficially with many. And here is the beautiful irony. Introverts are often extraordinarily good friends, precisely because they have limited social energy to spend. They don't waste it on performative relationships. When they give you their time and attention, it is real. It is chosen. It is precious. The introvert who doesn't post photos is not withdrawing from life. They are protecting the depth of their engagement with it. Chapter 6. The Trauma Survivors, What the Body Remembers. We need to go deeper now. into territory that is less comfortable, but essential. Childhood trauma leaves marks that are invisible to the naked eye but profound in their effects on behavior. Complex PTSD, developmental trauma, early attachment wounds, these experiences reshape the nervous system at a fundamental level. One of the most common effects of early trauma is a disturbance in the sense of self. Trauma survivors often struggle with a fragile or unstable identity. They may feel, deep down, that they are fundamentally flawed or unworthy of love. That if people saw the real them, truly saw them, they would be rejected. For these individuals, social media presents a particular kind of terror. Because social media is, at its heart, an invitation to be seen. And being seen, for a trauma survivor, can feel like exposure. Like vulnerability. Like standing naked in a field and waiting for the judgment to fall. The avoidance of photos is often, in these cases, an expression of profound shame. Not guilt, shame. The difference matters. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am something bad. A person in the grip of toxic shame does not want their face on the internet because their face feels like evidence of their unworthiness. This is heartbreaking, and it is far more common than we acknowledge. But there is hope in this story too. Because healing from shame involves, among other things, the slow reclamation of your own image. Learning to look at yourself with compassion. Learning to say, I am worthy of being seen. For many survivors, the act of finally posting a photo, of finally saying, here I am, and I am not ashamed, is a profound moment of healing. Not a requirement, not a measure of progress. But for many, a symbol of freedom. Chapter 7. The observers, the watchers at the edge of the digital fire. There is another type of non-poster who is rarely discussed, the observer. You almost certainly know someone like this. They have a social media account. They scroll, they watch, they follow, they know everything that's happening in everyone's life. But they themselves, silent, invisible, a ghost in the machine. What drives this behavior? The psychology here is fascinating. Some observers are simply curious. They find social media endlessly interesting as a sociological phenomenon. They like watching how people present themselves, how narratives are constructed, how communities form and fracture. But they have no desire to participate in the performance themselves. Others are observers because participation feels dangerous. They fear judgment, fear being misunderstood, fear that anything they post will somehow be used against them, by an employer, a family member, a future partner. This is not paranoia. In many cases, it's justified. The digital world is not kind to the unguarded. A single photo, a single comment, a single moment of vulnerability shared publicly can follow you for years. Observers understand this. They've often watched it happen to someone they know. And they've made the rational decision to protect themselves by staying behind the glass. But here is the shadow side of the observer personality. Sometimes, observation becomes a substitute for participation. When watching other people's lives becomes a way of avoiding the risk of living your own. This is not judgment, this is compassion. Because the observer often wants very much to participate, to share, to connect, to be seen, but the fear is simply too great. And so they watch, and they wait, and sometimes they wait so long that the window closes. Chapter 8. The parents, protecting what cannot be undone. Let me tell you about a different kind of non-poster. One whose silence is not about themselves at all. There is a growing movement among parents, particularly parents who themselves work in technology, psychology, or law, to keep their children entirely off social media. Not just limited access, not just privacy settings, complete absence. These parents have thought long and carefully about consent. About the fact that when you post a photo of your child, that child cannot consent to being a public figure. Cannot understand what it means to have their image on the internet. Cannot know that this photo might be seen by strangers, downloaded, shared, commented on. They think about the teenage years, when that child will be navigating identity, peer pressure, and first love, and whether the existence of hundreds of childhood photos online will be a gift or a burden. They think about the world their children will inherit. A world where facial recognition technology exists. Where data brokers exist. Where the digital footprint you create for your child before they can speak will follow them, in ways we cannot fully predict, for the rest of their lives. This is not paranoia. This is parental love expressed as protection. And many of these parents, in their effort to protect their children, also stop posting photos of themselves. It feels hypocritical, they say, to protect my child's privacy while freely surrendering my own. This is a kind of integrity that I find deeply moving. Chapter 9. the secure ones, full lives, no proof required. Let's return, in the final stretch of our journey, to what I believe is the most psychologically interesting group of all. Not the wounded, not the fearful, not even the philosophical objectors. The fully alive. There is a phenomenon in positive psychology called post-traumatic growth, the idea that some people, after going through extreme suffering, emerge not just intact but transformed. Wiser, kinder, more present, more grateful. But there is also what we might call everyday growth, the quieter, less dramatic accumulation of wisdom that comes from living thoughtfully. Paying attention, choosing depth over breadth, presence over performance. Some of the most vibrant, joyful, connected people I have ever known simply do not post on social media. They travel, but they are too busy marveling at the temple to photograph it. They celebrate, but they are too deep in laughter to pause for a selfie. They grieve, but their grief is too sacred to broadcast. They have understood something that takes most of us years, sometimes decades, to learn. The moment you try to capture a perfect moment, you have already lost it. Because the perfect moment was never the image. It was the experience, the feeling, the warmth of another person's hand, the smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of your child's laugh echoing down a hallway. These things cannot be photographed. Not really. And people who understand this deeply, who have tasted the difference between living an experience and documenting it, often make a quiet, irreversible choice. They put down the phone. They close the app. They look up. And they are, I would argue, among the freest people on earth. Chapter 10. What to do with what you've learned. We have traveled far together in this essay. We've visited the interiors of confident souls and wounded hearts. We've sat with trauma survivors and philosophical rebels. We've listened to the silence of the observer and felt the fierce protectiveness of the careful parent. What do we do with all of this? First, let's talk about compassion. The next time you encounter someone who doesn't post photos, resist the temptation to fill their silence with your assumptions. Don't assume they're depressed. Don't assume they're antisocial. Don't assume they're hiding something sinister. Human beings are astonishingly complex, and the reasons for any behavior are rarely what they appear to be on the surface. Ask yourself, what is the most generous interpretation of this person's choice? Then start there. Second, let's talk about self-reflection. Whether you post frequently, rarely, or not at all, this essay is an invitation to examine your relationship with visibility. Ask yourself, why do I post when I post? What am I hoping to feel? What am I afraid of? What would it mean to share less? What would it mean to share more? There are no right answers. Only honest ones. Third, let's talk about the deeper question underneath all of this. Because ultimately, this essay is not really about social media. It's about a question that human beings have grappled with for thousands of years. How do I know that I exist? How do I know that I matter? How do I know that I am loved? Social media is simply the latest arena in which we try to answer these ancient questions. And the people who don't post photos are simply people who are looking for answers somewhere else. In a quiet room, in the eyes of a person who loves them, in the work they do when no one is watching, in the private, unperformed, unbearable beauty of simply being alive. Epilogue. A letter to the invisible ones. If you are someone who doesn't post photos, if you are one of the invisible ones, I want to say something to you directly. You are not strange. You are not broken. You are not missing out on life because your life is not visible to strangers. Your face not being on the internet does not make it less beautiful. Your memories not being captioned and shared does not make them less real. Your joy not being liked and commented on does not make it less precious. You are not less, because you are less visible. You may, in fact, be more present, more private, more whole, and in a world that increasingly confuses noise with substance, your silence is not a deficit. It is a statement, perhaps the most powerful statement of all. I am here, I am real, and I do not need your permission to exist. That is a thought worth sitting with. Quietly, without posting about it.